Okay, we ended last time talking about Elisha's bones and the man that was thrown upon him and he jumped up. And I just want to bring some like anecdotal things, which means I'm going to tell stories about that. There was so much power in, Holy Spirit power still in Elisha's bones that just someone coming in contact with that gravesite came back to life. And that's not the only place we see something like that in the scriptures. We've got in Acts 19, it talks about Paul's handkerchiefs and aprons, or basically, maybe his sweatbands, his working stuff. People were taking that from him and putting it on people, and demons were coming out of them and they were being healed. We read in the New Testament about Peter's shadow. He would walk by people, and if the shadow would touch him, they would be healed or delivered. There's an old story about I think it was about Smith Wigglesworth. He was preaching at this one area in England, I believe it was, and he would sleep in the bed at night, and this woman's husband worked nights, so he would sleep in the bed during the day, and he was not a Christian, and the woman was hosting him and had sponsored him to come, I guess, and all of this, and so she was just begging Smith to witness to her husband. And one morning when Smith got up, she was just begging him to witness, you just stay around, I've got to go. And he, just as he was leaving, he says, "Don't change the sheets." And so, what happens, the guy lays down in that bed, and because of the Holy Spirit unction that was upon Smith Wigglesworth, the husband lays in the bed and he comes under conviction of sin. And so, there's, the Holy Spirit even resides, it seems, in things, that these people were in contact with, and it's kind of an indictment against us, I guess, at this day, that we don't have more of that. Charles Finney tells a story of getting on a train, and he got on the train, and people around him all of a sudden were looking at him and say, "Who are you? You convict us of sin." And he hadn't said anything. It was just the presence of God resting upon him. And so may we move once again into that era. It seems like in great transitional times in history, the power of God comes in these remarkable ways, like during the time of Elisha or Moses or Jesus, great transition times, which brings something else in mind. I'm just going to share this too, not really related, but during great transition times, it seems also there are moves to kill off the children. During Moses' time, before he was born, the Pharaoh was having the Israelite children, boys were being killed. Moses escaped that. During the time of Jesus, when he was born, Herod issued a warning or an edict to kill all the children under 2 years of age, because that's when the wise men told him, this one was born who was to be king in Israel, was born that time. So they were killing off the babies then, but the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him to flee to Egypt. And I would say during this age that we're in now, with the great abortion move worldwide, in America and worldwide, there's something real special about this generation. The survivors of abortion, anyone that's been born since 1973, I guess, you're a survivor of this generation, and God's got a real call on this generation. That's just an afterthought. As we look at the rest of 2 Kings, it's just kind of the history of the kings again until we get to chapter 17 and we get to verse 6. And this is we're wrapping up this whole history of Israel, its initial history. And here in verse 6 it says, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and carried away Israel into exile to Assyria and settled them in Halah and Habor, on the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes." And so we see here Israel finally succumbs because of their sin, because they never had a righteous king, because they didn't have righteous living in their country. Just like the law of Moses said, if you continue in sin, judgments will come and you'll be taken captive and you'll be the tail and not the head, and all of those kind of things. And so it happens, and Assyria captures Israel. And we see in the next verses explains why they were captured, but I'm going to skip ahead to verse 13, 2 Kings 17:13. "Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, 'Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you through my servants the prophets.'" And so the words being said here, "I've warned you over and over again, and that's what we'll look at in the rest of the Old Testament. Is we were finishing up the history of Israel through the era of their kings, and we're going into here. Israel has been captured by Assyria, and we're going to end up shortly seeing Judah being overtaken by Babylon. Then we deal with the rest of the Old Testament is basically looking at the messages of the prophets during this time, what they were saying during this time. It looks at the wisdom literature, or the writings of Solomon and the Psalms of David and others, and kind of that thing. And there's only one other historical time then we basically deal with is when Judah is coming out of Babylon and going back to build Jerusalem, and that we'll find that historical time in the rest of the Old Testament. But basically the Old Testament from here is kind of the things that happened, the things that were spoken by the prophets during these reigns of the kings. And that's what it says here is, I send every prophet and every seer saying, turn to my commandments, but I sent them to you. And in verse 14 it says, however, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant, which he made with their fathers, and his warnings, which he had warned them, and they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them. And they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. Then they made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire, and practiced divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from his sight. None was left except the tribe of Judah. So here's the fall of Israel, a horrible time. They've forsaken the Lord, and they finally come to their end as a result of an invasion by Assyria, taking them, because they had rejected all of the messages and the messengers that the Lord had sent. So we've come to the end of the end of Israel, the northern 10 tribes. We're talking about here. All that's left is Judah, which is the southern 2 tribes of the initial Israel, which we refer to as Judah and Benjamin. So we get to chapter 18 in 2 Kings, and this is the reign of Hezekiah. Here's a good note. It says, verse 1, now it came about in the 3rd year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, became king. He was 25 years old when he became king. That's always scary to me when he brings the ages of these kings, whew, boy. And he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. And he did right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father David had done. He removed the high places. That's very rare. This is a total reform, a total revolution of let's go back to the Lord in every way. That's happening during Hezekiah's reign. And this is after Assyria captures the 10 northern tribes. So he removed the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. This is a wild story. Here Moses had made a bronze serpent when the serpents were biting all of Israel and they were dying, and he had made a bronze serpent and he held it up on a pole, and everyone looked on it, and everyone that looked on it was healed. A picture of Jesus, of course. But they put it in the Ark of the Covenant. They kept it there. Well, during the reign of Hezekiah, he destroyed it because people started to worship it. That's not uncommon that we gravitate to physical things and take our affections and put it on that rather than the point behind that. Just one quick story here is that there was a man that came from my hometown actually years ago and was in South Africa, and he was praying and he was being used by God in the healing ministry quite a bit. And it came to this one point where there were so many people, he thought, I can't pray for everybody. So he prayed over this water, threw the water over the people, and a lot of people were healed. Well, by the time I visited Botswana, years and years later, about a century later, the people there were worshiping water. They called them water churches. And they had gravitated from worshiping the God behind the water that was prayed for and healed them, and they started worshiping the water. The good news is that they've now realized that they're in cultic activity, and they've called for people from that same place, from my hometown, that are coming there to teach them the true gospel. But it's not unlike us to turn to these physical things and replace them with the spiritual thing that God was trying to say.